Hey everyone, this is Madeline, aka Galactic Storyteller. We have an exciting impromptu interview. On the line with me right now is retired Black Ops whistleblower Cody Snodgres, and he's here today with us. We are going to go the distance talking about the offer he was made to blow up the Alfred P. Murrah building. For those of you that don't know, that was the building that Timothy McVeigh blew up. But it was originally offered to Cody, and he has been underground for 20 plus years. He is just coming out the last little while with his story, with his information, and we're going deep into the rabbit hole today. He's agreed to be with us for as long as it takes. If we have to do 3 and 4 parts to get through all the information, we are committed to the truth. So Cody, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your time today.
Oh, thanks. It's wonderful. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, good. Now, just for the listener's sake, because he is not coming out visually, just with the information, and this is impromptu, I do have him on my phone. We are going to do the interview this way. Not only that, but there's been a lot of shadow banning on YouTube, a lot of censoring of information. His equipment has been messed with and even destroyed by people who do not want this information out. So Cody, I'm going to ask you to augment your bio a little bit, tell us about your background, and then let's start with what's been going on in terms of them messing with your equipment and trying to censor the information you're putting out.
Yeah, and before we start, we always quote the 1982 IIPA, that's the Intelligence Identities Protection Act. It's U.S. Code Title 50, Sections 421 and 425. And it says the disclosure of a U.S. government operative's identity is illegal only if it is done intentionally and with knowledge that the government is still actively maintaining a cover for such an operative. And some of the people we're going to talk about are dead if we use their names, and then other people we won't use their names if they're active or in some other category. And the reason we do this is, if you recall, back in January 2013, there was a CIA case officer, John Kiriakou, and he was in the CIA's RDI program. That's rendition, detention, and interrogation. And he was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for violating this IIPA. He had come forward and was a whistleblower, and he had inadvertently, during an interview or something, let out an active agent's name. So they used this IIPA Act to hammer him and put him in prison. So we're not going to make any mistakes or anything like that. We always put that in as a caveat before we begin an investigation. So
perfect. Well, thanks for clearing that up. So you guys, all you're going to be looking at is my face and my reactions. Just treat this like a radio show. If you want to just go about your day and listen, you're welcome to do that as well. So Cody, let's talk about your background.
Okay. Yeah, people ask me that a lot. In 1974, I graduated from high school in Dallas, Texas, and I took the SAT test, Galactic aptitude test, for going into college, and I scored in the top 1% in the United States on that test in physics. And so later on in 1975 at East Texas State University, the CIA came to recruit me there based on those scores, and I turned down recruitment at that time. But I did begin working with some Vietnam veterans and stuff, and people that were in the CIA in Vietnam, and had a lot of training and everything. And then later on, I graduated with a double Bachelor of Science degree in both mathematics and physics. And then I went on to work on my Master of Science degree in physics. And we got to fly the Space Shuttle simulator down at NASA. Our physics department went down there. And then I worked as a geophysicist for Chevron Oil Company and Amoco. And during that time, those were civilian fronts. They have what they call a NOC, which is a non-official cover operative, and then they have OCOs, which are official cover operatives. And during that time, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Amoco, and this was in the like 82, 81, 82 area. And from 82 to 85, we were involved in the CI operations over in Mean, Arkansas with the Clintons. And we can talk about all that later.
Perfect.
And then you fast forward up to the point in October of 94, I was offered the job to bomb the Murrah Building for $1 million by Harold Leonard. I can use his name now because he's dead. And then we wrote this book about all this. I waited 22 years, keeping silence, to write the book. And it's a 700-page book. It's called Choosing the Light, Dark Secrets of the Oklahoma City Bombing. And people, if they want to get it, they can get it. We have two websites, one here in the USA, which is CodySnodgres.com. And then the other one is with our friend Ole Dammegard over in Europe. It's lightonconspiracies.com/Cody. So if anyone's interested in this book, it's got a lot of information. We're getting good reviews on it and stuff. But it tells the whole story of all this Black Ops stuff and the Murrah Building and McVeigh and so forth. So
great. I'll provide that in the description box so they can get to it. Okay,
so it's a big story. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of parts to it. So any questions you may have, just fire away and we'll do our best.
So you were not in the military, you were Black Ops, so that is what, a military or a private contracting company that works on behalf of the CIA. Tell us how that works.
Yeah, I was an independent contractor, and that means I turned down civilian recruitment by the CIA, and then I worked with agents and or assets of the CIA, and we did jobs that people didn't want to get blowback from. People go, what's blowback? Blowback is when, a perfect black operation is an operation where it is conducted and only the people that conduct it know about it, or the principals that hired it out, and the civilians in the area, whatever country you're in, they don't know anything about it. It never makes the news. There's no evidence of any kind, and that's what a true black op is. And so we were people that were hired when the CIA or the case officers who had political careers or families to protect or whatever it was, they didn't want to get involved in it, or they wanted a military cutout, or like Tim McVeigh, or someone to conduct the operation where there wouldn't be any blowback to them.
Okay, so real quick, let me ask you, how much of the taxpayers' dollars do you think are being channeled or funded into the black operations without their knowledge? Best guesstimate.
That is a great question. The answer is a lot, but they also, besides the tax dollars, that go in, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the NSA, the CIA, a lot of them have slush funds and black ops money. Like in Vietnam, they had the triad, the opium and the heroin. In Afghanistan today, they have the largest poppy crop they've ever had. Last year was the biggest one they ever had. There's a lot of black ops money that comes from drug dealing, cocaine from South America, from the Ochoa brothers, the Medellin cartels, Pablo Escobar, all that stuff back in the 80s. And there's a lot of money that comes from covert arms sales too, like Boeing and McDonnell Douglas selling stuff to the Saudis, weapon systems, missile systems, telemetry systems. So there's a above board, vanilla type of taxpayer dollar thing, and the CIA gets money, for their budget every year, like the NSA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and so forth. But then they each have their own pool of black ops money, and that stuff is unregulated. We really don't know, the true amounts, and they launder the drug sales and the arms sales through various banks and front companies and so forth, and they bounce it around in offshore accounts and so forth, and launder the money.
So it might be worth noting that on 9/10, the day prior to 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld, what was he addressing Congress and letting them know, hey, was it $2 to $3 trillion have disappeared? We don't know where it's at. And then the buildings blow up.
Yeah, and that's funny. There was that just happened to be the section of the Pentagon where they had hired approximately 50 accountants and records type personnel and put them right there in that wing to supposedly find where all this slush money and the Pentagon money had disappeared. And then that's just so happens to be where it was hit. And when we talk about the Murrah Building later, the Oklahoma City bombing, as we have on a number of shows, that dealt with records destruction as well.
Well, that's why I brought it up, because I want the listeners to start recognizing patterns in their behavior and the way they systematically run these false flags. And I'm excited we'll have Ollie Dammegard on at some point. He's an expert in false flags. But let's go back to your experience as Black Ops, because you were working for contractors doing what types of jobs?
Well, we did Black Ops jobs. We moved things. We did bodyguard work. We did a variety of security type work. And we did, unsavory jobs that a lot of people didn't want to take. Some of the jobs we did when I was a geophysicist at Amico Production Company in Tulsa, Oklahoma, we were involved in the multiply nested CI operations over at the Mena Airport in Arkansas. And for the listeners that don't know about that, a basic rundown, I mean, we could talk for hours about it. Back, in 1984 in February, Congress passed the Bolin Amendment. And as you recall, there was a regional conflict in Nicaragua between the communist-backed Sandinistas and then the Contras. Daniel Ortega was the president there. So President Ronald Reagan ordered the CIA to conduct covert operations there and support the Contras. And they did that with 3 multiply nested operations in Arkansas when Bill Clinton was the governor there and Hillary was running the Rose law firm there, Little Rock. And the 3 code names of those was Centaur Rose, Rose Law Firm, that's what it related to, Jade Bridge, and Screwworm. And so a basic overview is, my job was driving and moving arms. And what was happening was Reagan had ordered CIA director to start supporting the Contras down there, and they were covertly sending them arms. And the Russians, on the other hand, were supporting the communists. And the theory was, Reagan didn't want another country like Nicaragua to fall to the communists, and the next thing, the domino thing, had come up to Mexico and then be at our borders in Arizona and California. So they were trying to fight the communists this way in a kind of a secret war. And the arms that we got came out of the Little Rock National Guard Armory. There were some people there who were working with CIA. The front was Army, National Guard. And they lifted out, a lot of the ordnance, and we'd move it to farms south of Little Rock, and then over to safe houses between Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And then we'd let them cool off because there'd always be an investigation. And so they were getting covert arms. They were stealing them from armories. They were buying them on the black market, and then they were shipping them all down there out of the Mena Airport. There was a pilot named Barry Seal who flew a C-123 plane, and he delivered a lot of the arms down in Central America. And then they brought cocaine and other drugs back to pay for the operation, because you got to remember, it's a black op. And they went around Congress, and Congress didn't know about it. And so the people in the CIA and then ground workers like us and the other people at the airport and the pilots, they all worked in the black ops to conduct these operations. And,
so in essence, you were a geophysicist on your outside world, but really you're in transportation, a truck driver.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And a lot of the loads, we didn't know what was in them. This was a need to know. When you do black ops stuff, it's all compartmentalized.
Mm-hmm.
And that way, if you don't know who your contact is and you don't know what you're driving, if you do get stopped by domestic law enforcement or something, you don't have any information to give. And so a lot of the people we met, we had codes and code words. I wouldn't know who I was going to turn the load over to or whatever. We can talk about all the operational stuff, but it'll make this interview go for 6 hours. but anyway,
need to know. We'll work on need to know.
We moved ordnance basically.
Okay. And you did this for how many years?
Oh, about 3 years or so in those operations there. But we did other things in other places. Did
you know about the 2 little boys that were murdered in Arkansas?
Oh, are you talking about Kevin Ives?
I can't draw their names right now, but the 2 little boys that saw the helicopter, or not the helicopter, the plane landing at the airport, and they eliminated them as witnesses.
Well, yeah, that one guy was Kevin Ives, and we have a section in the book here that has quite a bit of information about the Clintons and the CIA in there. And we talk about Kevin Ives. They found him on the railroad tracks one night after he saw too much. And he had supposedly cut his head off with a butcher knife. And they said it was a suicide, But Clinton himself had appointed the state medical examiner as part of the cover-up. Bill and Hillary Clinton were working for the CIA at that time, and he was using his position as governor as a front, and Hillary was using her position at the Rose Law Firm as a front for doing these CIA ops, just like we were using our positions at Amoco as a front, and Barry Seal was using his position at Rich Mountain Aviation. That was the front company that he had set up for the CIA to be able to move the arms down to Central America and then bring the drugs back. Then they had to launder the money, and they did that through the bank at Worthington, the Whitewater scandal, Jim and Susan McDougal, the Worthington Bank of Atlanta, the BCCI Bank, and the Caymans. That's the Bank of Commerce and Credit International. So we've done a number of interviews. People can look up on the Jeff Rentz show, Hagman and Hagman, Dave Hodges. We've covered all this a lot, and it's covered in the book. It's a 700-page book. It has all the details, dates, names, times, everything.
Okay, so let's just clear the air up front. You are not suicidal, correct?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when we first started getting this book out, I waited 22 years to get this story out. We had to wait till Bill and Hillary Clinton were out of office, and it took me 4 years to write this thing. But just before we broke it out in the public, my friend Ole Dammegard at lightonconspiracies.com helped us do that. We scheduled 4, 5, 6 interviews a day. The idea was to get it all out as quickly as possible, so the more people that knew about it, the safer I would be. And I went to my doctor. I've had the same doctor for a long time. He has a top secret clearance. And I told him, I gave him a copy of the book, and I had blood tests, full physicals. And I told him, if I have any weird puncture wounds or strange auto wrecks or anything that happens, it's because of this book. And so we have a medical records of all, my heart's good. I signed a statement, had it notarized saying I'm not suicidal, I'm of good mental health, and blah, 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 because the classic Clinton death list, as some of your listeners may have heard about it, there's approximately 140, 150 people that have all went to testify or talk about the Clintons. They're all dead, like Vince Foster. We have a chapter in this book which goes through like Seth Rich and some of the other people like Kevin Ives and those guys down in Arkansas. Everywhere the Clintons have been, there's a massive death list. And if people don't believe me, they can Google it up on the internet. They call it Arkanciting. There's a lot of people that just died, plane crashes, suicides, accidents, so forth, around the Clintons. And so
I was aware of that, but I didn't know the body count now was up over 150, 160. Is that what you said?
It's somewhere 140, 150, 160. Some of the more recent guys are the guy that surgeon that was up in New York recently, just a few months ago. He was going to testify against the Clintons about the Haiti thing with the money from the Clinton Foundation,
the child trafficking.
Oh yeah, all of it. The Clintons are, in my opinion, the biggest husband-wife criminal team in American history. A lot of people would say Bonnie and Clyde, were a good.
I was just thinking about Bonnie and Clyde. They're way bigger than them.
Yeah. Wow. And so hopefully by exposing this stuff, I'm not the only one that's brought this information out. When people start getting into this and looking and doing the research, which we ask people to do, don't just believe me. Look for yourself, compare different sources. We're all being propagandized by the media. There's so many lies that have been told. And what we're trying to do, like with Oli Dammegard, who's been a researcher for 30 years, is to dig down to the truth and find out what the truth is, wherever it leads. It's apolitical. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's where the truth leads. And if someone pedophiles little kids or someone murders their own associates like Seth Rich or Vince Foster, they need to be held accountable in a court of law. And the same laws need to apply to them as they do the rest of us regular people. This idea of the elites can do whatever they want and get away with whatever they want, and then the rest of us, get a ticket for not wearing our seatbelts. It's not fair.
Right.
We're doing this so that we can bring light and truth and hopefully end some of this horrible corruption that's in our country.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys coming out and being the lights that you are. That's something that we're always talking about on the channel, is the truth is what's important. And it's hard. Coming out with the truth is very difficult. It's not the warm and fuzzies. A lot of people have been taught to believe that it is. They don't want to look at the negative. But the reality is you have to, in order to expose what's going on and bring the light in. That's how it happens. What I would like to do is go back. I know you've told the story 100 times if you've told it once, but let's go to the Murrah Building and them approaching you on bringing it down and why that is. Can we go there?
Yeah. Back in September 18th through 22nd of 91, I was involved in Project Slammer. We can talk about that later. They had a vanilla part and then a black ops part. I was in the black ops. It was a covert assassination program. And
okay, hold on. I'm gonna stop you right there real quick. You said vanilla part and black ops part. So for the rest of us who don't know these terms, vanilla part is what you see on the surface. Everything is legit. It looks kosher. Black ops is what's going on behind the door, right?
Right.
Okay.
And and in Project Slammer, I just have to go in this briefly. It was begun back 84, 85, and it was a 10-year study, and the NSA, the DI, the Defense Intelligence Agency, Air Force, Navy Intelligence, CIA, FBI were all involved. And basically what it was in a nutshell is we had several of our top spies turned. One was Aldrich Ames. He was our CIA station chief in Moscow, and the KGB had turned him as a double agent. So he was spying and giving the KGB secrets. They caught him, sentenced him to life in prison. Another guy was Robert Hansen. He was a 26-year FBI counterintelligence officer, and he had also been turned by the KGB, and he was given in. So he was convicted, and then Scott Walker was a guy selling Navy secrets about our Polaris missiles and stuff to the Russians. So we had a whole spate in the mid-'80s of high-level defections, and Project Slammer was sold to Congress as a op to determine why our guys were turning, and to develop psych profile tests and psychological tests that they could give to the new guys, new agents, to help weed out, this type of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so Congress approved it, and that was the vanilla part, or the white part, or the part that Congress knew about.
Okay.
And the black ops part, the CIA used it. They were doing a lot of psychological profiles, behavioral science, behavior modification, and so forth. And they used it as a way to study the effects of microwaves and sodium-based lasers, X-rays, directed energy weapons, and so forth, as a way to modify behavior and or terminate at a distance. So that's what I mean when I say there's a vanilla part and then a black part. The black part's the one Congress doesn't know about. It's funded by CIA slush funds and drug funds and stuff. Nobody knows about it. The other people, the other players like the Navy, the NSA, they weren't aware this was going on. See, so that's what I mean by vanilla.
Okay, great.
So anyway, I died in that project in the hospital. My heart stopped twice. They had to shock me back with a defib machine, and that's a whole other story there. But fast forward to 1994, that's when I was offered the job by Harold Leonard in October of 1994 to bomb the Murrah Building. And we had he had a backpack, purple and black backpack with about $500,000 in it in cash, U.S. dollars. And he offered me the job. I turned it down on patriotic grounds, and I was all by this time already busted up. I had several sets of broken ribs, nerve damage, fractured vertebrae, all kinds of stuff incurred over the years of operations. And I was operationally ineffective. And I had severe PTSD, and I was drinking heavily at the time to cover my PTSD. And so by the time they offered me that job in 94, I was ready to retire. And I think that's one reason they did it, was they needed a patsy. And then they also could hush me up about all the stuff I knew in case I ever wrote a book like this or ever talked. So they offered me that job, and I turned it down. And the whole story's in the book. And then McVeigh took the job, and we can talk about the reasons why the building was bombed and what all happened. All that's a big, big story. This book right now is 700 pages. It's highly documented, has a lot of dates, times, federal 302 forms, DEA forms, ATF forms, all kinds of corroborating evidence and stuff. But it was 1,200 pages when we first wrote it. We had to cut it down to 7. Still too big. It's just a big subject over many decades of time. And you can't just put it all in a 1-hour interview or something.
Sure, absolutely, which is why we'll do parts. But let's talk about why. Why was the Murrah Building a target? What was in there?
All right, now that's a great question. I'm glad you asked it. But for the listeners out there, we have to go back and give a little bit of historical background so they'll understand the bigger picture. Okay, so back in the 1980s, while we were doing Operation Centaur Rose and Jade Bridge and all these things in Arkansas, as you recall, Saddam Hussein had come to power in Iraq, and he was secretly on the CIA's payroll. Mm-hmm. He was another asset, just like me and thousands of other guys.
Most people don't realize Bin Laden and many of these foreigners that are supposed to be our enemies are actually on the CIA payroll.
Certainly. One of them was Manuel Noriega down in Panama. Mm-hmm. He was on this payroll. And one of my girlfriends, she had dinner with Pablo Escobar, the big drug lord mm-hmm. down there in Colombia one time. And we have a whole lot of inside knowledge and inside stuff about all that. But let's get back to the reasons why the Murrah Building was bombed. Saddam Hussein fought a war with Iran in the 80s. It was about 8 years they fought. It was a very bloody, costly war. And we covertly armed him since he was a CIA asset. You remember the Iran-Contra affair and Oliver North and all that stuff? Well, anyway, to make a long story short, we armed him with the Ames strain of anthrax. Iran had a 10-to-1 infantry advantage they had 10 soldiers for every one soldier that Saddam Hussein had. And we were worried, the U.S. was worried that Iran would maybe overwhelming one day. So as a last-ditch defense, they gave him the Ames strain of anthrax secretly, covertly. It was manufactured at Fort Detrick, Maryland. It has a small spore size. It has a altered protein coat so that it is more readily uptaked and absorbed in the human body, hence the weaponization aspects and designation. And so we covertly gave him that, and then we covertly gave him the Hawkeye 123 cluster bombs, which is a real efficient way of killing lots of people from the air. So he had this stuff in case he got overrun. Well, after the war was over with Iran, he still had all this stuff sitting there. The American people didn't know that we had given him this stuff. And so when Saddam invaded Kuwait, they massed about 300 tanks and 100,000 soldiers on the Kuwaiti border and went into Kuwait and took it over in 6 hours. And the troops, a lot of them went to the Saudi Arabian border. And this made the Saudis very nervous. It made the stock market and the bankers real nervous because if he invaded Saudi Arabia, it could really upset the world's oil prices. So the Saudis put a lot of pressure on Bush and our administration here, and they cooked up Desert Storm, which was this January 1991. Now I'm getting to the Murrah Building, but you got to know the background here.
You're good. Keep going.
Okay. If I get to talking too fast or misspeak, just let me know.
I got you.
I'm trying to cover a lot in a short period of time here. But anyway, so we had a problem. First of all, our government had covertly armed Saddam with chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. And they didn't want the American people to know it. But now here our troops had to go over there. And our standard anthrax shots were a 6-month course. You took one shot each month to build immunity because anthrax is a highly virulent toxin. And we didn't have time. So what they did was they shortened the shot process, and they made it down to one shot in 1 month. To do that, they added adjuncts to the anthrax vaccines called squalene. It's a long molecular fatty acid, like shark oil, and it boosts the immune system of the person so that the attenuated anthrax virus can seed adhesion and develop immunity.
And we have squalene tissue in our body, so I would imagine that was done so that it would be more absorbed.
Yeah. The squalene is just an adjunct. Like, you remember the Thermosol mercury vaccines,
yep.
Where they had mercury in them, and then they had the aluminum. These are all adjuncts to boost the body's autoimmune response. So anyway, to make a long story short, they bypassed FDA testing. They signed these secret executive orders to let all this stuff go. And then they gave all our people going over there these anthrax shots. Well, it caused a lot of autoimmune dysfunction and problems and sickness, which would later be called the Gulf War syndrome. Now, on top of this, we also used for the first time in that war depleted uranium weapons, primarily in the M1A1 Abrams tanks, which had the silver bullet, they called it. It was a thin, stabilized flechette round that had about an 8 or 9 inch rod of depleted uranium inside of it. And also the other weapons designation was the A-10 Warthog jets, the tank busters that used the 30 millimeter chain guns with DU. Now the Pentagon admits that they used 200 tons of this depleted uranium stuff. The problem with it is that when it hit the targets, it had such high kinetic energy that it formed new compounds in the fireballs, uranium oxide and uranium dioxide. Now our MOC gear, the NBC, nuclear, biological, and chemical gear that us and our allies, like the British, had, the filters only went down to 10 microns. And these new particles, remember, this has never been used in war before, these new particles were 4 microns. So what was happening is our troops were breathing this stuff. It was going through our filters, and this low-level radiation was accumulating in the thyroid glands and in the reproductive glands. And so when our soldiers came back, there's approximately 480,000 Americans, men and women, in theater, and they came back. And like the men, when they come back, the first thing they do is make love to their wives. And this low-level radiation, which accumulated in the thyroid and the reproductive glands, the testicles, it was transmitting radiation poisoning through their semen into the ovaries of their wives, and then from there to the children, and from those children to the grandchildren. And so what happened, just like the Agent Orange scandal in Vietnam, the Pentagon had a brand new problem on their hands. They had a multi-generational radiation sickness that was being transmitted. They did not know how many generations down this would go. The half-life of uranium is millions of years.
Oh,
and so
God.
What happened was the soldiers had first got these bogus anthrax vaccines that were untested, which made a lot of people sick. Then they breathed all this weird uranium poisoning from the weapons. Then they also breathed all the oil well fire smoke and all the other crap that was over there. And they were very toxic. And later on, it would be called the Gulf War Syndrome. And that was in 91. And so a few years later, in 1994, Congress was having Gulf War Syndrome hearings. And there was a senator named Chris Shays, Republican from Connecticut, I believe, sitting on the Armed Services Committee. And they were tasked with figuring out Gulf War Syndrome and getting some type of monetary compensation for all this sickness. And so he ordered the FBI to go around and accumulate the records of approximately 480,000 men and women in all branches of service that had been in Iraq. Army, Navy, all of it. And guess where all these records were stored? They were stored in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. And when it blew up,
there they go.
The records were lost, and the Pentagon was off the hook for billions, hundreds of billions. They did not know how many generations this sickness would transmit. And so, by their own admission, later on, September 19th of 1996, if I remember correctly, they had congressional hearings on Gulf War Syndrome, and the Department of Defense admitted at the hearings that over 400,000 Gulf War Syndrome medical records had, quote, disappeared. Now, I have parts of this hearing thing in the appendix of the book. It's a highly documented book. We have the lot numbers of the vaccines, the first ones that went to Dover Air Force Base. We have a whole lot of supporting information. I'm just giving you the basic thing here. That's one of the reasons the Murrah Building was destroyed. Also, another reason it was destroyed was to help protect Bill and Hillary Clinton, who were in the 90s going through their impeachment hearings. You recall April 1995 is when the Murrah Building was blown up, but they had started the Whitewater investigation on Bill and Hillary July 26th in 1994. And so they'd had the May 6th, 1993 Paula Jones lawsuit, all the sexual harassment stuff went out. And then Waco, of course, happened in 1993. And all of these CIA ops that were going on in Arkansas when he was governor and she was running the Rose Law Firm, there were a lot of law enforcement records down there. The ABI, the Arkansas Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the IRS, for money laundering, the DEA, they'd all got wind of all this massive arms and drug operation at the Mena Airport, and all those records were stored at the Little Rock FBI office. And just prior to the Oklahoma City building being blown up, they were transferred from there to the Murrah Building. So all those law enforcement records were also lost in the blast. We know that because there was a Tulsa police detective named Craig Roberts. He's written a number of books as well. He got a call from an anonymous FBI agent at the Little Rock FBI office saying that all this massive treasure trove of records were being moved. And so when the Murrah Building blew up, not only did the Pentagon get off the hook for untold amounts of money, lots of money in medical bills, so did the Clintons get off the hook because Congress could no longer subpoena all those records they needed for his impeachment hearings and the Whitewater hearings and everything else.
Why do you suppose the Clintons wield so much power, even back in the 90s? I mean, who the hell are they?
Well, they work for the CIA. They're protected by the shadow government. The CIA has a lot of agents and case officers. It has contract agents. It has independents like me. It has paid assets like Manuel Noriega in Panama and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. They have agents and assets everywhere around the world. It's huge. It's a huge octopus of shadow government operatives. Some of them are bankers.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are drug dealers. Some of them are the Saudi royal family, like Osama bin Laden. Some of them are pilots. Some of them are in, Navy. They have double agents inside MI6. They have double, triple agents inside Russia, the FSB and the KGB. It goes on and on and on. They have this huge network, and the Clintons are part of it.
Yeah, most people don't realize that Huma actually, they're still very deeply connected with the Saudis because her family is royalty over there. So
Right.
We get a lot of pay to play with the Clintons, and they've been doing uranium deals with the Saudis, have they not?
Yeah, that uranium one thing is a whole nother big thing.
We'll cover that another time. So let's go back to the Murrah Building. You were offered $1 million USD to take care of that. You refused to do that, and then they went to Timothy McVeigh, correct?
Well, I don't know where they went after that. They told me $500,000 now and $500,000 when the job's done, and you can get your standard EOD team, that's explosives and demolition and so forth. And I don't know where they went from that, but Timothy McVeigh was certainly somewhere on the list. They may have approached other people that I'm unaware of. All I know is what happened with me, and then I turned that job down. And then when the Murrah Building did blow up about 6 months later, I retired in March of 1995. And then in April of 1995, the building went up. So I was offered the job to bomb it 6 months before. And remember, that was in 94, and that's right in the middle of all those hearings with Christopher Shea and all the cover-up of the Gulf War syndrome and the anthrax and the medical stuff. And it was a big thing. It's hard to keep it all. There's so much going on during the time. Waco was there. Timothy McVeigh was actually at Waco and watched the Branch Davidians, what really happened. The story of what really happened there is in this book, too. There's a lot of stuff here that's never been told, like the assassination of Staff Sergeant Barry Sadler down in Guatemala. There's just lots of stuff here in it. So, I'm sorry, what was your question? I lost track.
Oh, I did too. We'll move on.
Okay, I get to yap in my mouth so much sometimes I forget. And I get in loop, I forget what I'm talking about,
That's okay. So with the Murrah Building going down, at what point did you become a target? Because you knew, you had insider information at this point that
Right.
This was an American job.
Right. After the Murrah Building went up on April 1995, I was unaware of what happened after I turned the job down. And when it went off, it was just as much a surprise to me as anyone else. But when it did, I went black. We have false identities and all kinds of things. When you go black, you drop out of the system. We're trained on how to do all that. But I left the country for a little while. I went down to Oklahoma. We had some old safe houses between Oklahoma City and Tulsa, which we used in the CI ops over in Arkansas back in the 80s. We still had those places. So I stayed there a while, and then I left the country for a while. I came back, and one of my handlers in the CIA, his name was Duke Flaglier. I can use his name now because he's dead, of Agent Orange. But he was did 2 tours in Vietnam with the Special Forces, and then when he got out of the Army, he started working for the agency. But he called me and he said, you need to leave the country. And I said, okay. He said, you know too much. You turned from an asset to a liability. And he said, I've got a place in Belize, and I'll give you the keys and stuff, and you can go down there and stay, and then we're going to stage you out of Belize somewhere else and, disappear for a while so nobody could get to me. Because I was a loose end. I did have operational knowledge, at least that this operation was planned, and it was at the behest of our own government.
So when something like that happens, do you have to pack up your wife, children, any dependents that you have, or do you just go? What's the protocol there?
It depends. It depends on the operation, it depends on the parameters, it depends on the level of blowback, it depends on a lot.
What did you do?
I went off alone and changed identities and left the country.
Okay.
And then I came back in the country later when McVeigh and Terry Nichols had been brought up here to the 10th Circuit Court under Judge Richard Mage for the little show trial, In the book here, we have a whole section on the 10th Circuit Courts in Denver, Colorado, and how they're controlled by the CIA. Judge Edward Nottingham was nominated in 1977 to his position by George Bush Sr., which was DCI, Director of Central Intelligence at that time. One of the prosecutors up here was Tom Strickland, the U.S. Attorney, who was appointed by Bill Clinton. They worked in a law firm, Brownstein, Hyatt, Faber, and Strickland in Denver. Norman Brownstein, the principal partner, had also worked in the 70s for the CIA in the Council of Six. A lot of people don't know what that is. The Council of Six was a group of high-powered attorneys that the CIA hired to take care of any blowback that came into the civilian courts here on any of their operations.
Oh, wow. So their job is to police what's going on in the courts and to make sure the rulings happen the way they're supposed to.
Right. And
Okay.
we have in this book, which details the Department of Justice Promise software. That's Promise software. It's a special program that takes all the cases in the DOJ and the ones that involve national security issues or CIA issues or NSA issues, like the Joe Naccio case with Q West. Those are all steered to the judges that work for the CIA. What a lot of Americans don't know is I told you the CIA has all these undercover plants and operatives and assets all around the world. Some of them, they really work for the CIA, but their front is being a federal judge. And so what they do is anytime a CIA case is there, those judges, while putting out the illusion that they're just a federal judge, they're secretly working for the CIA to cover up any type of black operations, and their job is to make sure none of the cases ever see the light of day. And so there's a massive cover-up. In this book, we detail the Promise software, how they steer cases to the CIA judges, how they cover them up. Timothy McVeigh's case was one of them. He was an ex-military cutout, and they steered the case up there to the 10th Circuit so they could control the outcome of it. We talk in the book about jury wheels and how the FBI duplexes the identities of members of the jury wheel and substitutes their own undercover agents so that they're guaranteed to control the verdict in the juries. There's whole levels of corruption that the Americans are unaware of, okay? And this book gives dates, names, time, tells you how it works, everything. This is high-level stuff. People are just simply unaware. We've been lied to for so long and so much by this huge deep state. All this stuff's going on, and it's not talked about in the mainstream media.
No, it's not because it's controlled. And so I do have some information on my website. That's one of the things I'm passionate about is decoding the illusions of this reality because this construct that we are presented with is controlled. It's false. The narrative they put in front of you, you have to be willing to challenge that and to get to the truth. So you actually did federal time in the same facility as Timothy McVeigh before he was executed. Is that correct?
Yeah, let me basically go through the story there. In 1994, in October, Harold Leonard offered me that job to bomb the Murrah Building, and I turned it down. So you fast forward into 1997 and 1999. I was up in Colorado Springs, and the ATF and DEA began an undercover operation called Operation Stingray. And in that operation, I met ATF agent Blake L. Butler. His nickname was Bo. And it turns out later we would find out that Bo had been at the Waco, Texas Branch Davidian compound. He was there. There were 54 dead and 21 children. We can talk about all that later. And he was also at the Ruby Ridge incident with Randy Weaver up in Idaho. And he was also supposed to be working at the Murrah Building the day it was bombed on April 19, 1995. And he mysteriously was not at work that day when the building blew up. He would later be awarded the nation's top cop award by Vice President Al Gore and United States Attorney Janet Reno. So during this operation, me and Blake Butler were talking. We were at an undercover ATF DEA surveillance house. I did not know there were 4mm hidden cameras in there. And so the Columbine High School shooting had happened on April 20th, 1999. And we were all sitting around in there, and Bill Clinton and Janet Reno were on TV. And we started talking about him. And he wanted to buy some C4 plastic explosives and some machine guns and a bunch of stuff. And I told him about CI operations. I said I used to do all that stuff. I don't do it anymore now. And I didn't know we were on hidden 4mm cameras. So I told the stories of the pedophile rings in Little Rock, the stuff Bill and Hillary Clinton were into with
Oh, shit.
CIA. What?
I said, oh, shit.
Oh, yeah. I talked about Captain O'Brien, who I've met. All the stuff about the drugs, the arms. And so what happened was the CIA got a hold of the tapes and disappeared them. They ordered the ATF to plant me with fake evidence. And so they planted me with fake evidence. And then in October of 99, the ATF came to arrest me, but they turned me over to the CIA. And the CIA guy said, I flew out from D.C. to be with you. The whole story's in the book, And they asked me direct questions about President Bill Clinton and so forth. And they were just there to make sure I wasn't going to talk to the feds. And then they turned me over to the FBI and the DEA and all that. And they wanted me to talk, and I wouldn't talk. Then they put me in front of Judge Nottingham. And he was nominated by ex-director Central Intelligence, George Bush. They steered my case to him.
Wow.
And I went over 4 years and never, ever was allowed to even have a motions hearing. And almost all my hearings were all sealed. They kicked out the court transcribers. They kicked out the U.S. Marshals.
So you didn't have due process?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And during that time, they put me in Supermax. I didn't even have a traffic ticket on my record. Absolutely clean. And the judge said no bond under any conditions. And they put me in Supermax solitary confinement a few cells down from where Tim McVeigh was. And so we can talk about all that story. But later on, after he was sentenced to death, McVeigh was executed on June 11, 2001. I had hired a CIA tape expert. His name was William Valentine. And he had had coffee with President Reagan, President Bush, house, to make sure they weren't being eavesdropped on. And he helped me with my case, and we had 100% proof that they tampered with the tapes, planted evidence, did all this high-level crap. And so I'm jumping through time here. I'm covering a lot of time in a short time. July 24th of 2003, Judge Nottingham ordered that I had a final hearing, and all of this information was going to come out about the bombing of the Murrah Building and about the CIA and about the Clintons and about all of it. And on July 7th, 2003, I was at a Walmart on 8th Street in Colorado Springs. This is 2 weeks before the big hearing where we were going to take down the ATF, the DEA, and expose the CIA with all this stuff. I never heard it, I never saw it. I only heard it. I was leaned over my LTD Crown Victoria cleaning the windshield, and there was an empty parking place in front of it. And all I heard was the revving of a motor and screeching of the tires. And a car pulled in there and hit my LTD. It totaled it completely. It was parked with the motor off, and it knocked it about 6 to 8 feet back. And it knocked me back up into a car. I landed on the roof. I rolled over the hood. I bounced off a fender of another car and then hit a concrete light pole. And I was in serious condition. And my doctor told me I was lucky to be alive.
So this was not an accident. This was a direct attempt to eliminate you.
Well, yeah, but I can't prove any of it.
Right.
So anyway, a couple of weeks later, I got out of the hospital. I'm in an outpatient facility for physical therapy. And I walk out, and there's a police cruiser, Colorado Springs police cruiser, sitting there with the motor running on the street. I got around by my other vehicle. They jumped the curb, sparks flying. They floored the motor and came right at me. And I thought I was going to be crushed. And at the last minute, they turned sideways. And dressed in a Colorado Springs police uniform was none other than the nation's top cop, Lake L. Butler. And he stuck his finger at me about 4 feet away. And he shook his finger at me. Like, don't go to court, don't testify. Because he was going to go to prison. He was going to lose his position as nation's top cop. And he would have been indicted, for obstruction of justice, perjury to the grand jury, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so he peeled off. And I was pretty shaken up. And I drove back home out to my mountain cabin here. And I had to stop on the way and throw up. And I was crying, and I was pretty upset. So I got back home. And I was sitting here watching a movie with my wife and 2-year-old son. And we heard somebody pull up in the front yard. And I walked and saw, and I figured it was the CIA going to kill me. And so I went out there, and sitting in his car with the smoke windows was Harold Leonard, the guy that had offered me the job to blow up the Murrah Building back in October of '94. And he had his hands on the wheel, and he rolled the window down, and I looked at him, and he says, hey, I used to work with the guy, and he says, hey, I just want to tell you, we've been ordered, if you go into court, remember this big court hearing was only like 2 weeks away. He said, if you go into court, we've been ordered to kill you. And then he pointed up at my house. He said, we've been ordered to kill your wife and your son too.
So this was a professional courtesy he was extending you in that you testify, we will kill you. So he was doing that as your friend off record?
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, he put his hand on the steering wheel, put his head down, took a big deep breath, and he goes, it's nothing personal. And I said, okay, thanks for the heads up, So the next day I'd had enough. I'd just been creamed in a car, almost killed. Then I got killed almost again with the nation's top cop threatening me. And now here the CIA guy was sitting in my front yard telling me he's going to kill my family. So the next day I called my attorney, Harvey Steinberg. He was the Denver Broncos football team attorney at the time. And I told him, hey, I want to change my plea. And so we went up there to the 10th Circuit Court, and we met United States Assistant Attorney Greg Goldberg. And he said, look, I don't know what's going on with this case. He said, but I'm getting a lot of heat about it. Everybody wants it to just go away. So you pick a charge, any charge, I don't care which one, and you're out of here. So I pointed to the indictment they had on me, which was fake evidence, that they planted. And I just pointed to something. I didn't know what it was. It turned out to be dealing firearms without a license, which is a ridiculous charge, considering I used to be the biggest machine gun dealer here in the state of Colorado.
Sort of ironic.
Oh, it's so funny. All this is documented in the book. I mean, we have copies of my license and copies of all these indictments and everything in the appendix, and this is all, straight up stuff. So anyway, he said, pick a charge, any charge, I don't care which one, you're out of here. And so I pled guilty to something, just to save my family and shut up. And I made up my mind after all this ordeal that if the Clintons were ever out of office, Bill was out of the presidency and Hillary was out of Secretary of State and all the things she was in. And once they were out of power, because they can manipulate the power structure to shut people up or murder them like they did Seth Rich or Vince Foster or any of the number of other people. Like I said, we have a whole section in this book about all these people you've never heard of who the Clintons have had murdered and had accidents and so heart attacks and so forth. So anyway, I got done with all that and I waited 22 years and I wrote this true story in this book. And it's been selling like wildfire all around the world.
Good.
We've been getting censored big time here in the United States. People overseas, in a lot of the countries, English-speaking countries, it's being translated into 3 languages right now. But it's in the PDF version's out in English. And here in America, we've been absolutely hammered. They've attacked our phone calls, sent viruses to our computers. They've hacked our USA website several times, shut down the PayPal, on and on and on. You know how it all goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I'm trying to condense a lot of stuff into a small block of time. Now, each one of these stories, like Waco or whatever, we can go drill down into depth. The corruption in the 10th Circuit, I can talk for 2 or 3 hours about all that. It's whatever you want to cover, but it's such a big story over several decades that, we give a brief overview on interviews like this where it's the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And then if, like on the Jeff French show, we did one and he canceled these other shows, he goes, we got to have more time. And we did a part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, so forth. So you have a lot of information about 5G, about directed energy weapons. We have information about the MK Ultra programs and the Monarch mind control program.
Let's talk a little bit about that if you're okay, because I'm actually, I've met Fritz Springmeier. I'm sure you're familiar with him. I deal with MK Ultra with clients that I see. So let's talk a little bit about that. I have introduced that several times to the audience, if you're okay covering that topic, and then we can save 5G, which I do want to talk about. We can hit all the other stuff at part 2.
Yeah, that's interesting that Fritz Springmeier. I've met him, talked to him several times. Did you ever know that girl that he was with before he got planted with evidence and sent to prison too? But
Cisco Wheeler?
Oh yeah.
I never met her.
Yeah, we were at 2 or 3 different things where Fritz, and we would go out and get coffee and sit and talk and stuff. And then Cisco, he told me, he says, man, she can't stay away from you, Cody. And everywhere I went and sat, he'd be talking. She'd always get beside me. And she was a mind control lady.
Right.
And here we run the Starlight Healing Center now. After I had my near-death experience in Project Slammer back in 91, where I died twice, I had like a spiritual epiphany and all that, had the classic near-death experience. And so I realized that we were spiritual beings of light. And I changed my dark path that I was on and started doing healing work and everything else. But yeah, Fritz said that Cisco was a mind control and he was helping her. And we've done dozens of healings out here on people that were in MK Ultra. So Some of them the healings took, some of the deprogramming took, and some of them they didn't. So we can talk. I can talk for hours about all of it. I know a whole lot of stuff about it. So ask whatever question. I just want to say to the listeners, the objective of mind control is to condition a subject in such a way that they end up acting without consciously thinking about it.
Do you think Timothy McVeigh was under mind control?
We've been asked that question on a number of shows, and what I do know about him, mostly from letters that he had written his sister Jennifer, is that after he, gosh, it's hard. I have so much information. Okay, Timothy McVeigh could have been under mind control. The people in the book here, we have quotes from some of the security guards that worked with him at Calspan up in Buffalo, New York, prior to the Murrah Building bombing. And I have 2 or 3 quotes of co-workers that say that he looked like he was kind of a zombie sometimes, and that he would just be like dead and real distant, and that he would just flip, he would change. And they didn't think anything about it. They just thought he was kind of weird until after the Murrah Building, and they saw his face all over the TV, and they kind of started wondering, was he mind controlled? It is quite possibly could have been mind control. But we have to go back to the historical stuff. Now, all this stuff's in the book, but I'll cap it briefly.
Sure.
He was in storm in January '91, and he did get the anthrax shots like everybody else, those bogus anthrax shots. What a lot of people don't know is that the Pentagon was doing secret tests, not only of the anthrax vaccines, not only of depleted uranium rounds, but also of implantable microchip technology. This was to be rendered from a satellite system that Lockheed Martin produced. It was called the BEAST system, Battle Engagement Area Simulator Tracker. And these Lockheed Martin satellites were going to read from space. Okay, they would inject implantable microchips covertly into armed services members without their knowledge, under the guise of getting their anthrax shots. So there were multiple layers of these shots of corruption and cover-up. Timothy McVeigh got one of these chips without his knowledge. And so the satellites were testing, if someone gets blown up in an explosion, the old dog tags they used to wear around their necks could be scattered hundreds of yards away, and there'd be body parts everywhere. But usually the torso would remain. So the satellites could track from space these implantable microchips with the RFID, radio frequency identification frequency, in real-time battlefield conditions in smoke, sand, wind, and so forth. And so later, when he got out of Desert Storm, he was an M1A1 Abrams tank commander, and Terry Nichols was his platoon commander. They got out. He won a Bronze Star for confirmed kills in the Gulf War. And when he got out, this protein code on this implantable microchip that he was covertly given began to fail. And it made him sore, and he got a big red bump, and they had it removed. And then when he realized that the Pentagon had used him as a guinea pig, not only for the anthrax shots, but also for these implantable microchips in the BEAST system, Lockheed Martin testing. This is all covert, see? American people never heard of it. No one talks about it. He got really mad and angry at what they'd done. And then he also was at the Branch Davidian compound and watched what they really did, what really happened. And that's a whole other story, what really happened there. I know a guy that was there, was a Branch Davidian member named Ron Cole. That story's in the book. What really happened at Waco, not the government propaganda they put out. Mm-hmm. Everybody was there, and then from there he went up to Calspan. We know a lot of this. He was also set up for the Special Forces. When he got back from Desert Storm, he was pissed off about the microchip, but he said, I want to be a Special Forces soldier anyway. And he was in a group of people. There was over 100 of them in a class, and they do the standard psych tests, psych profiles. And think it was Fort Bragg, might have been Fort Benning, can't remember. But the CIA pulled him and 10 other guys out of the class. And they said, we want you to work as a covert operative for us. Your front, we want you to go ahead and graduate from the Special Forces. And your front is going to be a Special Forces soldier. But then we'll pull you out of your MO, your MOS, and you're going to be doing work for us, bombing buildings, assassinating people, moving drugs, and so forth. And McVeigh rebelled against that. He was a patriot. He said, I don't want to be in all that black ops shit. He told the CIA to fuck off. And so then he left that and got a civilian job up at Calspan up in New York. Now, Calspan, a lot of people don't know where McVeigh was working, was a big defense contractor. Now, we're getting to mind control, so just hang on. At Calspan, they had the Redstone Project, the Air Force. These were telemetry, ECM cables, electronic countermeasure cables, missiles, implantable microchips, all kinds of high-level DARPA-type technology. DARPA is Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and they're responsible for a lot of the weird new technology that comes out.
Well, I think it would probably surprise most people to realize this technology existed well before the 90s, what they're releasing now. So.
Oh, yeah, it's old. I mean, these guys, they're 30, 40 years ahead of what we're seeing, you know. It's just real shocking to most civilians to understand the depth, not only of the corruption in our government, but the depth of the deep state itself and how we've been lied to and propagandized big time.
Right, and I just didn't want them to be surprised when you're talking about Timothy being chipped in the 90s. They absolutely had this technology back then. So go ahead, continue.
Yeah. Anyway, all this is covered in the book in great detail. We have a lot people that have been reading this book. A lot of them are veterans. We sent a copy to Kevin Shipp. He's been doing a lot of stuff out on the internet. He wrote the book Company of Shadows.
I love him.
Yeah, he was William Casey's one of his guys on the detail. He sent me an email here the other day. But Kevin Shipp's a good guy. He's a white hat. He's constrained by his national security agreements. He wants to tell more, but he does the best he can. Right. And we all try to do the best we can to expose this deep black, the secret space program, the space spins, 5G. There's so much to the story, but you're absolutely right. They did have all this implantable microchip technology way back then, and they were experimenting with protein codes, so the body's autoimmune system won't reject the protein code and so forth. So McVeigh had a number of issues with this, and we know this because we have copies of his letters that he wrote Jennifer, his sister, when he left the Special Forces. He told her, he said, I'm sick of all this black ops shit. I'm kind of paraphrasing. We have actual excerpts from his letters to his sister where he told him they put a microchip in me and all this stuff. And so later, before the trial, the FBI up here in the 10th Circuit, they went and kicked her door in, and they got her as a witness against her own brother.
Oh, no.
They confiscated a lot of the documentation and letters that she had, and it vanished off in a black hole. You got to realize these are massive cover-ups on top of massive cover-ups on top of massive cover-ups. The bombing of the Murrah Building laid off on a patsy like McVeigh. Okay? The anthrax vaccine, the whole scandal of our vaccines bypassing FDA testing and using our soldiers as guinea pigs. It's illegal.
Was he really executed, or did they just make it appear as though he was executed and still he's off the books? Because I've heard noise about that.
Well, here, I'll tell you what I know personally. I never saw Timothy McVeigh. I was in the SHU, it's called the Special Housing Unit at the FCI, that's the Federal Correctional Institute in Englewood, Colorado. That is a supermax facility, the SHU facility. And there was a whole orderly there named Gerald Two Bulls from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. He'd been in some kind of a stabbing thing or something. And his job was to clean and mop and everything. And those cells are like bank vaults. And they were trying to punish me. They put me in there in a pair of skivvies is all I had. They took out my mattress, no blankets. I slept on concrete floor. I went for days without eating because I thought the CIA was going to poison me. And so anyway, one day, Gerald Tubles told me, he said, "Hey, Tim McVeigh's right 3 cells down here, and they're taking him out to execute him." And so they moved him out of there and took him up to the Terre Haute, Indiana facility. That's the FCI, Federal Correctional Institute, where they have the new death chamber. And so here's what I know about that. A few weeks after that, after the execution, that was June the 11th, 2001, I was in the FCI at Inglewood in a maximum security facility, and my attorney came for a legal visit and some other attorneys, and I was there, and one of the guys I knew had Nathan Chambers as his attorney. Now, Nathan Chambers was the attorney that sat with Timothy McVeigh's mother and held her hand at the execution on June 11th, 2001. And so my buddy says, "Hey, that's the guy that watched McVeigh get fried, And I said, "Well, can I talk to him?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll ask him." And so I went over to Nathan Chambers and I said, "Hey, were you just up there and seen McVeigh?" And he said, "Yeah, we were sat on the front row with his mother looking through the glass when they gave him the injections." And I said, "Well, what was it like?" And he put his face down and closed his eyes, and he held up both hands with his palms out, and he just shook his hands and shook his head, and he turned around and walked out. Okay, and people have asked me, "Do you think they really killed McVeigh? Do you think it was a patsy? Do you think what it was?" I don't know. What I do know is looking from about 2 feet away into Nathan Chambers' face, and his reaction when I asked him what was it like, you could tell the man was very distraught. I don't know if you know what it's like to hold a mother's hand while her son is getting a lethal injection. But it's an ugly thing, and it's a hurtful thing. And he was certainly visibly shook up. And he left the facility without even finishing his legal visits or anything. So people ask me, "Do you think they really killed Timothy McVeigh?" Judging from the reaction of this attorney, I believe somebody was killed there because his attorney was really shook up. Did they give him a fake, injection? Was the whole thing staged? It could have been. I don't know. We can conspiracy theory this stuff to death. I'm just telling you what I know and what I saw.
Right. We'll just deal with the evidence.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So
that's all
with
I know. That's all I know about it. That's all I saw. I never got the scene in there. I just had the whole orderly tell me, and then the day they were moving him to take him up there on death row, that whole SHU unit, the special housing unit, was just clear full of guards and suits and people I've never seen before, just full of people. I mean, something big was going on, but I couldn't see what it was because you've only got those little windows to look at.
And he knew he was a Lee Harvey Oswald. He knew that, correct?
The patsy.
Yeah.
It's a patsy op. See, look, the reason to blow up the Murrah Building was destruction of all the records, just like in the Pentagon, with all that missing money, okay? And that's the section that got destroyed, okay? The records were destroyed. That was the operation. That's why I was offered the job, to conduct an operation to destroy a building with all the records and stuff that was in it. Now, the cover for that operation was the Ryder truck in McVeigh. And they had 3 separate bombs already pre-planted inside the Murrah Building to detonate it. What was supposed to happen was McVeigh was going to pull up in the Ryder truck. He didn't know all that other stuff was in there all ready to go. He didn't know at that time he was going to be the patsy. And they timed the blast of the Ryder truck with those other explosions inside so that he would be the cover for the operation. You got to look at this logistically from an operational viewpoint. If you're going to blow up a civilian building in a rich country like America, where there's a lot of cell phones and a lot of cameras and a lot of security around a building in a large downtown area with a lot of witnesses, you're going to have a damn good cover to conceal the black op. You understand?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So we can talk more about all this because there's so much more to all this. Like the 12 security cameras, they tried to subpoena the OG&E, Oklahoma Gas and Electric building across the street. They had security cameras pointed at the Murrah building, and there were various cameras around there. And Jesse Trinidad, one of the researchers, he's an attorney in Salt Lake City, ex-Marine Corps, he tried to subpoena all the secondary surveillance cameras around the Murrah building to determine the shock wave and where the blast came from. Finally, after years and years of litigation, he got copies of them. The FBI fought the whole way. The minute the Murrah building was detonated, they went to all these buildings and confiscated all the security cameras so no one could see the real explosion. And years and years and years went by. McVeigh was executed, blah, blah, blah. He finally won release of all 12 of these videos. And the Murrah building went up about 9:02, 9:03 a.m. Central Time on April 19th, 1995. And so when they got the tapes, finally, they looked at that point, and every single tape went blank just before the Murrah building blew up, and then they came back online after.
That's a heck of a coincidence.
Why? I guess mice must have got in there and ate the wires or something, you know?
Wow. So maybe this is a good time to introduce the term false flag. And we don't have to get into all the false flags, but let's talk on the surface before we bring Ollie in at some point about what a false flag is and why this would constitute as a false flag.
Well, false flags, they go back, it's a Navy term, historically.
Mm-hmm.
And what would happen in the old days, a Navy ship would come in the fog or something and fire its cannons at another ship. And before it did it, it would change its own flag, like between the English and the Spanish or the French. And the people on the boat, you know, they wouldn't destroy the boat, but they'd see the flag, and then they'd report back to the King of England or whatever and go, hey, the French just, you know, shelled us. And so they'd start a war. The truth is it wasn't, you know, the flag that they said it was. And so what it was a way to do was deceive the enemy and deceive them into something that's not true. And that's what's happening here with these false flags, with like the Parkland shooting and some of these Sandy Hook shooting. The deep state and shadow government orchestrate these things, set them up, pay operatives to conduct them. They plant evidence, post evidence, and pre-evidence. They doctor the narrative in the media. They use their control over the state-run media to create a PSYOP, a problem, reaction, solution scenario. And that's what a false flag is.
All right, and perfect. Just for the listeners' sake, we're not saying that nobody got hurt. Plenty of people get hurt in their false flag operations. The false part comes in when the terrorist, the so to speak terrorist, or the perpetrator is not who they're telling you it is. Correct?
The perpetrator is a patsy, like
right.
Lee Harvey Oswald or like Timothy McVeigh. It's someone designed to take the fall. And, you know, they executed Timothy McVeigh in record time. When he was sentenced to die for the Murrah building, 168 people. The death row inmates had completely filled up the FCI at Terre Haute, Indiana. And they bumped him ahead of a bunch of people that were waiting there pending appeals and so forth on the death row and executed him in record time. And one of the reasons they did that was to shut him up. Another thing they did inside the SHU there, Special Housing Unit in Inglewood, was they wouldn't let him talk to anybody unless they were lieutenant grade or higher. You have to be at least in the BOP, that's the Bureau of Prisons, for 15 years before you could be a lieutenant. And so they wouldn't even trust the regular BOP guards to talk to McVeigh. They were under orders. No one could even talk to him. And the whole orderly, Gerald Two Bulls, told me this straight to my face. He said, one day I was mopping the floor, and McVeigh came out and stuck his face out the window there, not out the window, but up to the window. And he walked by and he said, hey. And McVeigh said, hey. And then they threw Gerald Two Bulls in the hole for 2 weeks in solitary in his own cell and wouldn't let him out for 2 weeks, just for saying, hey.
Oh, my God.
And so the patsies are controlled, and then they usually are killed, like Lee Harvey Oswald was killed later by Jack Ruby, of course. Mm-hmm. So there's a way they conduct a false flag operation. They lay it off on a patsy to cover up their own crimes. And then the patsy either is executed or dies or slips on a banana peel or something like that.
And the scenario is always the lone crazy gunman. I mean, that's a cue right there. People need to pay attention. It's always one singular crazy lone gunman.
Yeah, that's a false flag deal. That's a CIA casebook study for doing assassinations around the world. You know, you blow up a school bus full of kids just to get to one guy, and then you lay it off on some terrorist group, you know, ISIS or Shining Path or the Bin Ladens or something, and then you confiscate, you confuse the evidence, you control the investigation, you have the forensics people plan evidence, alter evidence, doctor evidence, and then you control the narrative later on in the media, where you know, problem, reaction, solution. Mm-hmm. The problem is, here's this lone gunman that does some stupid thing like shoot up a school. It traumatizes the people. It instills fear. That's a reaction. And then the solution, of course, is something the deep state wants. They're manipulating people through fear, through strategic deception. Okay? And they use two main things. One is disinformation, and that uses media outlets to cause people to believe that something false is in fact really true. Mm-hmm. And they have cover, which uses media outlets to cause people to believe that something true is really false. And so these are forms of strategic deception when you're running a psyop and you're fragmenting people's minds through fear, like the Murrah Building. And then they show you the pictures of the guys carrying out babies and stuff. Did you know that one of the daycare, the actual 3 bombs that were in there before McVeigh ever showed up, one of them was in the daycare. They deliberately put a bomb in the daycare center to maximize civilian child casualties so that they could use it later to pull on the heartstrings of American people.
See, and I hope that the American listeners are paying attention, and anybody else who is worldwide dealing with this kind of stuff, because it's not just happening in the US, but when they pull these types of shenanigans, they are terrorizing, they are the terrorists. They're terrorizing us, putting us in a state of fear. We're willing to give up a whole lot of freedom for this idea of security, and what we're really doing is putting the Patriot Act into full force. We are eliminating our freedoms left, right, and center.
Right, and that's the end goal. Mm-hmm. What they do is a series of these operations. Okay, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Mandalay Bay, Oklahoma City, whatever it is, and they wait a few months, then they do another one. And what it does is it fragments our consciousness through fear, and it's a very clever process called gradualism. It's part of psychological operations. The 4th Special Operations, Psychological Operations Group at Fort Bragg, they do all this stuff. They did it in Vietnam. They do it all around the world. But what they do through this clever process of gradualism is they stage event after event and then gradually mold the opinion of people. One of the goals of all this stuff is to get the guns away from the American people. Yes. So they stage all these horrible ops where kids are, shown shot or blown up or whatever, and some of them are actually crisis actors. We have proof of it.
Right.
They're not really people who were shot. They're just crisis actors. And so these operations are psychological operations actions directed against the civilian population of whatever country they're running. And these things are going on all around the world. It's part of the New World Order's attempt. They've got to get the guns away from Americans to get us all down complacent, and then they can put us all into the New World Order group.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about crisis actors on the next segment. I think this would be a great place to wrap things up. What I'd like to do is get your take. You had a near-death experience. You have discovered the fact that you are infinite consciousness, a beautiful creation. So what I'd like to do is, rather than end on a fear note, talk about what you do or how you have made that transition into being a light being, recognizing that you are and living from that place.
Well, that's a big subject, and I'd be happy to talk about that. I'll just give a brief overview.
Great.
Although I can talk for hours, there's a whole section in the book and in the CIA mind control thing about this. But yeah, I died in the hospital, and they shocked me back twice. And when my spirit left my body, I used to not believe in any of this stuff, but a near-death experience showed me that we really are spiritual beings of light. We are spirit, and you know, the spirit is indestructible. You can't be destroyed. And it also led me to believe in this process of reincarnation and so forth. But I've actually died twice, and now we help veterans and other people cross over, you know, to the other side. A lot of people have fear about death, but I'm here to tell you that it's like a big release. I mean, I floated over my body, and I watched the doctors. I was on no kinds of drugs or any alcohol or anything when I first went in the hospital. And the civilian doctors were looking at a CIA assassination technique. We can explain how it all works. It's real high-level stuff. They didn't know what they were looking at. They thought I might have had food poisoning or drug overdose. They didn't know they were actually seeing a CIA black op, because it was way up above their pay grades. But yeah, we are spiritual beings alive. I met my guardian angel there on the other side. We can talk about all that. Now we use her to do the healings here. We work on a lot of veterans and stuff. We never charge money. We do this stuff for the light and for the truth and for helping people. Because I did a lot of bad things in the past. You know, in my black ops world, I was greedy and I was arrogant and egotistical. But once I was humbled by a death experience and I saw the truth of us as spiritual beings of light, I realized then that I had to change my course. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm here to bring the light and the truth. And that helps build the good karma and to take care of the bad karma, of the ugly things we did in the past. And so we can talk. I'm just nutcase. I'm putting this in a shell. That's a whole big, huge thing.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
This is actually my favorite topic, spiritualism, actually. So whatever you want to say to end on a good note, I think that would be appropriate. What is the biggest lesson you can share with the viewers? Because many of my listeners have come out of Mormonism in particular, Jehovah's Witness, that type of regimented, controlled, false doctrine. So on a spiritual note, what would you say would be the biggest tip you can give to them to help connect with their higher divine self?
Well, I'd like to do a whole show on this one day. It's going to take an hour and a half to go through this whole thing about the near death and the spiritual aspects of it. But the biggest thing is, you know, I was raised Methodist, and I got a Bible here from 1963 and so forth. But I don't consider myself a big Christian religion guy. I mean, what I'm trying to say is every religion, whether it be Jehovah's Witness, Buddhism, Muslim, they all have elements of spiritual truth embedded in the religion. And that's what we're trying to do, is reach higher spiritual science and higher spiritual religion, like how does psychic phenomenon work? You can bet that in the 149 sub-projects in the MK Ultra CIA mind control monarch programming techniques and all that stuff, that they've studied this stuff. You know, how does mental phenomenon work? How does spiritual phenomenon work? How does remote viewing work, where you project your out of your body, like the Stargate program with David Morehouse and Joseph Monteagle and all this stuff. I mean, I can talk for hours about it. But the biggest thing I'd say is realize we are all, underneath whatever religion you believe, that's your business. Underneath that is the actual spiritual science of how spirits incarnate in bodies, how they leave bodies, how we take up these robes of flesh and walk the earth. And all of this stuff is spiritual science. And I think a lot of it's been denied to us by the Illuminati and the Freemasons who try to keep this stuff to themselves, and the Egyptian mystery school, the Essene mystery teachings, and
yes,
all of that stuff. But there is a spiritual science underneath this. And what I would say is keep your connection to source. That's the most important thing we have here. It's not money. Our connection to the creative powers in the universe, whatever name you want to call it, God, Allah, you know, that's not the point. Bickering about endless religious things is not the point. The true connection to source, to the creative flow and power in the universe, that's what we've got to maintain. And that gives us the strength to, as light workers, you know, and warriors of light, to face evil and the darkness and the false flags and the CIA and all of this New World Order stuff. And it's time that we all woke up to our spiritual lineages and we learn to use the powers of spirit. You can use it for the light or the dark.
Absolutely.
It's your choice, because we have free will choice. So I would just say to people to not focus so much on the dogma of whatever your religion is. And I know people who argue and they go, oh, my religion's right and you're wrong and all that. Stop all that. Let people be free and let them believe what they want, but look at the hidden spiritual truth underneath, because that's where our power lies and our connection to source.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. What I will do is in the description box below, I will include your information, where they can find a copy of your book, also Ollie Dammegard's, and then we can make arrangements to do a part 2. I would love to go into Waco and the other topics, spiritualism, and if you're in it for the distance, I am as well.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right. Excellent. Let the viewers go. Everybody, thanks so much for your time. You can reach me at galacticstoryteller.com. You can also reach me at galacticstoryteller@gmail.com. Like, subscribe. Most importantly, share this information. You can follow me on Twitter now because I'm so technically savvy. So follow me on Twitter. Share this information. I will tell you that the more you share this information, the safer Cody's life is, and many others just like him. So I appreciate your time today. We'll see you in the next video.